Hi guys, it's Kirsty. In today's video, I want to talk about where we might find ourselves just giving up on recovery and settling for where we are. I want to talk about why we might have got to that point where we think, oh, this, I can't get any more recovered. I'll just stick with this. I'll settle for this. And I want to offer some tips to kind of keep you kind of progressing and motivate you to keep working on your recovery to get all the way there, rather than settling for reduced anxiety, for example, but still 24/7 intrusive thoughts or whatever point you might have gotten to. But before I get too much into that, I would like to ask, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with new videos as they're released. So firstly, I want to begin by talking about some points in recovery where we might find ourselves thinking like giving up, essentially. And I'd like to talk about why we might feel like, just giving up in that moment. And I would like to offer some tips from my own experience to kind of, keep going. Now, so the first scenario I want to talk about is somewhere where I found myself a couple of times, was kind of just getting a bit fed up, to be honest, of going through phases of, where you're working on recovery, you're working hard and you're feeling some progression, and you'll go through phases where you won't feel as much progression. Now, actually, I've just done a video about getting over plateaus in recovery and talking about the reasons as for why, so you could always check that out. But I certainly found on my own recovery journey this happened a few times, and I found it on occasions a bit demotivating to go through those phases where you weren't feeling as much kind of improvement in your OCD. And then of course the frustration kicks in and you think, oh, F it, I'm not, why bother? I'm not bothering, because let's face it, the work that we have to do on our recovery for OCD is difficult. It's really, really difficult. Exposure is difficult. Exposure therapy, exposure and response prevention, or exposure and ritual prevention, which is the gold standard treatment alongside cognitive treatment, working on beliefs for OCD. Exposure is quite grueling. People do this for phobias. They may do sort of varying levels for trauma as well. I'm not quite sure about that, to be honest. But, it's grueling. It forces you to face your fears, the things that you're absolutely terrified of. No matter how irrational or illogical you may be aware that it is, the alarm system in your brain is sounding and you're feeling physical anxiety. So, you've got these are things that to you are terrifying, and exposure and response prevention it asks you to come face to face with sort of various things that will trigger obsessions that remind you of your fear and worst case scenario. So that's really difficult. Now, along with that, there's also the time consuming aspect of the cognitive work as well. If you're spending a certain amount of time a day working on your cognitive work, plus juggling a busy life outside of your recovery, maybe you have children, maybe you have a very demanding job, or maybe you are also a carer, or maybe you also have physical disabilities or something like that. Or maybe, maybe you're a student and you're studying, or whatever it might be, that takes this, work on your recovery. If you're prioritizing it, it can sometimes, you need to schedule in time to work on it away from the rest of your life. Now, if you're doing these things, you're spending time working on your recovery and you're doing exposures which are very, very difficult and going through a phase of not making as much progress for whatever reason that might be, you can start to feel really, really demotivated and really frustrated and just think, I'm not going to do it. And then you might find that even thinking about, doing the work for recovery causes this feeling of frustration, and you think you can't face it. Now, this is where the whole frustration tolerance part of OCD recovery comes in. So in Albert Ellis's book, Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, Yes Anything, he talks about, as well as our irrational beliefs and acceptance, he talks about our frustration tolerance, and that it can be very helpful in life for us to work on building our frustration tolerance. Now, there is actually another video on this channel about frustration tolerance that you can also check out for more information about it. But just to give a brief explanation, now I don't have anything in front of me, so bear with me. So a frustration tolerance basically is our ability to sit with the feelings of frustration without kind of giving up on the task that we're working on. So it can also be our beliefs about the feeling of frustration. You know, I can't stand feeling that frustrated, etc. So what we want to do is be able to work on our ability to sit with the feelings of frustration. So work on our recovery, even though we're feeling frustrated, even though we're having thoughts saying, what's the point? There's no point. I'm not getting any better, wasting my time. You know, so what? So what? You still want, you know, the other option to not working on your recovery is giving up. And if you're giving up, you know, then you might be getting worse, because OCD can insidiously creep into anything, and you could unknowingly fall back into doing compulsions that you had worked very hard to cut out. So this is where, like, I wanted to talk about frustration tolerance. If you are going through a period where you're not making as much progress, keep working on your recovery whilst feeling frustrated. I promise you, you'll be able to use these skills. If you've increased your frustration tolerance, your ability to do what you want to do, regardless of how frustrated you might feel, your brain will start to learn that the feelings of frustration and the thoughts that may come with it are irrelevant, and so there's less reason to be kind of sending these signals. Whereas if we react to those feelings and just give up, then, you know, our brain thinks, okay, yeah, that person doesn't like this, you know, this is helpful because the person's done what I've told them to do. You know, it's being at the mercy of our thoughts and feelings again, isn't it? Like with different parts of OCD. So it's the frustration tolerance bit that I think is very relevant here when you go through feelings of not making as much progress. So just be mindful of that when you're feeling frustrated, you're having thoughts, you know, angry thoughts about, oh, I can't do this, you know, I want to give up. And if you're sort of going to work on your recovery and then it seems to, you know, trigger these things, sit with it. View it as another exposure and don't respond to it by giving up. Keep going. So another reason why somebody might sort of start giving up on recovery and just settling for where they are, and I've certainly been guilty of this a couple of times myself, is because when we're at our worst in OCD, it is really horrible. And at the time we have strong beliefs that we can't stand it and all of that, which only adds to our further suffering. When you start to find a bit of improvement and you start to regain parts of your life back, it's really great. And if you started working on your perspective with OCD and think, you know, a bit more about gratitude, you start to feel very grateful for regaining parts of yourself, parts of your life. And, you know, maybe you're getting out and about, seeing your friends more, or maybe you're sort of getting a bit motivated with work again, or you're not having to work as hard to feel joyous with your partner or your children again, or, you know, maybe you've started enjoying sex a bit more again, or your appetite's coming back again, or you get back into your exercise and, you know, all sorts of things. But you start to get your daily joys back again gradually. And when that happens, it can be very sort of, because of the comparison to how you were feeling, it could be very easy to think that, oh yeah, I feel a bit, you know, well, I feel a little bit anxious, but it's nothing compared to what I used to feel. And you know what? That is really helpful to think that, because that's all part of learning to reduce the fear of fear. But what we don't want to be doing is just settling for that when you are having anxiety still, or you are still ruminating, having, you know, weeks of non-stop rumination, and then you kind of then go back into, okay, what did I do to get sort of to this point again? Then you go backwards and work it out. And that, you know, that is all part of recovery in terms of the setbacks and things like that. But what you don't want to be doing is giving up on working on your recovery in between those spikes. Spikes will always happen, whether or not you're working on your, you know, whether you're working hard. You will occasionally have spikes and triggers and feel like a setback, but that's the nature of OCD recovery, and you can come back from that. We've got videos about overcoming setbacks on this channel, which I recommend checking out as well, by different people as well. And it's always good to hear different perspectives on it. But what point that I want to make here is, even when you're going through, better periods with your OCD recovery, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be working on your recovery, because even though you're going through those better periods, you might still be, suffering from some symptoms. Even if it's a case of being stuck for a couple of hours, maybe you can work on not getting stuck for a couple of hours. Maybe you can work on the irrational beliefs that have, contributed getting stuck on those couple of hours. So you want to sort of keep working towards your recovery and not settling for halfway there, even if halfway there feels amazing compared to where you were before. And it's great to acknowledge that, but it doesn't mean that you want to be, resting on your laurels and giving up on recovery, just thinking, oh, I don't need to do any more. And another thing that you might find at that point is thinking, I don't want to work on my recovery because it reminds me of how bad I was, and that might trigger me, or I don't want to work on my recovery. I don't want to talk in my support group, or I don't want to, speak to any other OCD sufferers at the moment because I'm doing well and I don't want to be triggered. That might be another thing as well. And of course, you know what that is? That's avoidance. And avoidance is essentially, it's a compulsive behavior. You're choosing to actively avoid something that you're afraid might trigger your obsessions and trigger you to sort of go backwards again. And while you're doing that, you're still being dictated by an element of fear. So therefore, OCD is still at play. The more you kind of expose yourself to the risk of being triggered, the more you're showing your brain that you're not afraid, you can deal with it, you can stand it, it's not awful, it's not terrible. And the more you're kind of better arming yourself going forward with your recovery. And very important, and not to be ignored, the maintenance of your recovery as well. So from my own experience, those are kind of the reasons that might contribute to getting to a point where you are settling for where you're at and giving up on recovery. I mean, there are other things, you might kind of buy into the idea that you might have read about, untreatable OCD or something like that, and then just believe it's hopeless. And if that is the case, I'm so sorry that you've read that, because that's simply not true. With OCD, if it's still at play, there are fears there keeping somebody in the cycle, and it's just a case that those fears haven't necessarily been uncovered. Those fears haven't been identified and haven't been worked on enough and aggressively worked on enough and truly gotten under. There's no reason why, if you're working with the right person for you, somebody that knows OCD very, very well and has a history of, success in treating people with OCD, that you can't get better as well. So please do not buy into that. This is why sometimes certain OCD forums can be a little bit unhelpful, because when people are recovered and start to feel progress, they're less going into those forums, so you don't necessarily hear about the good side. And what's really important is to listen to people when they say, you can recover, you can improve. So please don't buy into that. It is not hopeless. It's bloody hard work. Absolutely no doubt about it. But what is really helpful is that we are lucky to have access to a community online now, with social media, and helpful support groups where you don't have to feel alone, and you can, if you don't have the strength for yourself one day, you can hopefully benefit from the strength of other people on their stronger days. So there's many reasons for us to feel hopeful about our OCD recovery. And Rob has done a video on this channel, which I just think is so important. And I never thought to do a video about this myself, the importance of hope in OCD recovery, because some days there are days that are so difficult and you're doubting everything. So all you can hold on to is hope on those days. And the more hope that people can provide, the better. I think it's so incredibly important. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you're maybe coasting a little bit, going through the reasons why you might be coasting, if you can relate to any of what I said, I hope that the tips that I've offered are of some help for you. But it's mainly a case of, overall, like, the message is, please don't give up. There are other videos also on this channel about coasting as well. I know Oliver did a good one a while ago, so I recommend checking that out as well. But basically, yes, of course you might have bad days where you feel like just giving up. Okay, if you want to, if you really feel like you have to give up that day, okay, some days we have to accept not being able to accept, but the next day, try and, even if you're feeling really, really bad, please try and push through and do the work for your recovery, because it will be worthwhile. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it has been helpful, and do take care. Bye.